magazine guru Lindsay Nicholson's life of turmoil. I could see this world I'd created was crumbling in her gripping new memoir. The former Good Housekeeping editor describes the car crash that forced her to confront past tragedy as well as the upheavals that followed: arrest, divorce, redundancy, all leading to her third act in 2016. Lindsay Nicholson was driving home to Berkhamsted in Hertfordshire from her mother's house in Essex. It was a Sunday night, and her thoughts were all for the week that stretched ahead. Nicholson was then the editor of Good Housekeeping, Britain's biggest-selling glossy magazine, and as usual her diary was bulging: lunches, interviews, photoshoots. Not that this troubled her. Quite the reverse, in fact. She loved her job uncommonly, not only because it was interesting and fun and she was very good at it, but because it had long been her refuge, the best way she knew to avoid thinking about other, more difficult things. As her BMW joined the Southend Arterial to a soundtrack provided by Magic FM, she was all anticipation, her mind as expectant as the white damask tablecloths at Claridge's, the hotel where she would regularly meet important advertisers for tea. But then something happened. A lorry up ahead crossed suddenly into her lane, and not in the usual way. It was at a right angle to the road, the container behind its cab slaloming in a balletic arc that would henceforth be forever imprinted on her mind. All she could do in the next split second was to brake hard and aim for the central reservation, hoping desperately that the drivers behind her would manage to stop themselves without hitting her. What was going on? Why had the lorry, the side of which was now about to fill her windscreen, pulled out? Only later would she learn that a man had tried to kill himself by running in front of it. He would spend the next 6 weeks in hospital, but like everyone else involved in the accident, he would live to fight another day. The crash exposed all the flaws. I kept trying to put everything back together, but it all kept going wrong. For Nicholson, though, life was about to change irrevocably nonetheless. For all its high drama, this crash was akin to a stone dropped coolly into a lake. Falling there, out of the blue, it disturbed what lay beneath the surface of the water, its effects rippling ever outwards. Triggered by the crash, past trauma, long repressed, rose up to destroy her peace of mind at precisely the same moment that the present began to conspire ruthlessly against her. By the following August, little would remain of the future she thought she had. As a younger woman, Nicholson had lost her husband, John, and 9-year-old daughter, Ellie, to the same blood cancer. She wrote a book, Living on the Seabed, about her grief, and has often spoken about it. She had also survived breast cancer, terrifying to her, because why wouldn't she die too? In the 10 months that followed the crash, she would lose her second marriage, her home and her job. The perfect binding of her life, perfect bound, is the technical term for the pages of glossy magazines stuck together with glue rather than staples, would come apart so completely that there were days when it ceased to have any meaning for her. Today, Nicholson still lives in Berkhamsted, in the house that she lost, and then, eventually, won back, and I must admit that I was curious to see it. In her new memoir, called Perfect Bound, this converted printworks with its resin floors and canal-side views induces in the reader deep suspicion from the off. When Nicholson's husband tells her it's their forever home, his plans for its renovation becoming ever more elaborate, you long for her to run straight back to London. But now I'm here, having walked from the station past weeping willows, old-world pubs and beautifully maintained locks. I'm at her kitchen table listening to birdsong and the sound of a bicycle bell on the towpath. I'm struck less by its grand design's glamour than its impersonality. It stands aloof somehow, as if Nicholson is only visiting. How does she feel about it? Doesn't it remind her too much of the past? There were mixed emotions when I first came back, she says, her hands around a mug of tea. It was a horrible feeling. But that's why I got my friend, Angie, to do the shamanism I describe in the book. I'm not particularly into shamanism, but the ritual really helped. She gestures at a terrace, a place usually reserved for spotting kingfishers or drinking a sundowner. That's where we threw my costume jewelry into the canal, she adds, and again, I think of ripples. Somewhere in the murk and the mud lie the broken statement necklaces and partnerless earrings Angie said would stand as a commemoration of Nicholson's time here, waiting to be discovered by curious future generations. Perfect bound is unputdownable, its unfolding calamities horribly transfixing. But I hardly know where to begin when it comes to talking about it. So much happens, a lot more than one person should have to bear in a single lifetime. Perhaps, then, we should just start where she does, with the crash. Does she feel, now, that if she hadn't been on that road on that day, life would have been very different? Or is it the case that, in the end, something else would have come along to derail her? She nods. Yes, absolutely that. The crash exposed all the flaws in my life. I kept trying to put everything back together, but it all kept going wrong. I needed to slow down, to stop and take a good look around me, so I could see that this world that I'd created, which very much belonged to the pages of my magazine, was crumbling. Nicholson had always been a workaholic. When her husband, the Observer journalist John Merritt, they met as trainee journalists in Plymouth, died in 1992, aged 35, she became a single mother to two small daughters. On a practical level, she had no choice but to work, supported by, among others, her close friends Alastair Campbell and his wife, Fiona Miller. But after Ellie died 6 years later, something else drove her to the office, whether she admitted it to herself or not. The things I didn't want to face up to were so awful. It would have been very hard to think about them. Instead, she focused her mind on other, more cheery matters, the dreams of her avatar, Claire, GH's ideal reader, her many cover stars, Nigella Lawson, Helen Mirren, Julie Walters, the perfect Christmas dinner, mince pies shot in the heat of summer. Incessant deadlines allow little room for self-pity, let alone for what people call self-care.